Thank you for tuning in to another episode of my Veterans to Success podcast. You probably know by now, my mission is to help 1 million veterans and entrepreneur business owners achieve the dreams, goals, and aspirations they deserve. That is why I created the Veterans to Success podcast, because I get to interview guys, men and women, who want to share their fascinating stories with you about their time before, during and after their time in the military, so you can benefit and overcome your challenges. So sit back, relax, and get ready to be mesmerized, astounded, and entertained. Hello and welcome to another episode of Veterans to Success, the podcast where I get to speak with seemingly ordinary people who have extraordinary stories. And today I've got with me Robert James. Hello, Rob. How are you doing?
I'm fine, Joe. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
That's fantastic. And thank you for sparing the time to come along today. And we've had a great chat before. And you know the drill. There's no big introduction because I prefer to do a steady reveal as we go along. You've had a remarkable career. And I'd just like to go through this. Before we get to now, to where we are today, having a chat, tell me about your life as a young boy, way before you joined the military.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, there wasn't a huge amount of life before I joined the military because I joined the military at 15. So,
right, well, I'll tell you what, that, at 15, that was all the life you'd had. So tell me about what was going on.
That was it. So I was brought up in Plymouth with my brother and parents, just a normal upbringing. We were a little 2-bedroom council flat and so on, and did all the sorts of things that you would expect of a young boy, in the 50s and 60s, really, getting into trouble a bit here and there. Nothing desperate, but just a good, happy family life. Yeah.
And that's because you know the aims of this podcast, really. It's a show that we come from different walks of life, and it does it actually builds our character. And I don't think that there's any one set of circumstance that can set you up particularly. I think that it's what you make of it at the time and how you develop it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. If you mean like the military shaping you at a younger age, that was certainly true for me, because, as I said before, I was just a young boy when I joined, and then subsequently spent over 30 years.
Yeah, that's
in
right.
The service. Yeah.
So before you joined the military at a young age, what was going on with your life? Because you had a brother, didn't you?
So, had a what?
You had a brother.
Yes, yeah.
And he was a helicopter pilot, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't. He also joined the Navy, but you're right about the helicopter link, because sadly he died in a helicopter accident, a Royal Navy helicopter accident in 1989. At the time, it was the biggest loss of life in a civilian operation, and they were just off Mombasa, and the helicopter crashed with 10 people died.
Oh, and that must have been,
yeah.
Well, that was a travesty, obviously. And yes, that was the link with the helicopter.
Yeah.
So what was going on in your life when you joined the military at age 15?
Yeah, well, to be honest, Joe, there wasn't, as I said, I lived in Plymouth, and there were only really a couple of choices that seemed to be open to me. I mean, certainly I wasn't bright enough to go to university. So you either went into the dockyard as an apprentice, or you joined the services, and mostly it was the Royal Navy. And I joined the Royal Navy as an engineering apprentice then. So it was really just, I mean, when I look back at it and look at some of the 15-year-olds nowadays, and I think, gosh, it's surprising, that you leave home at that stage, because quite clearly I was, just literally a young boy. I saw photographs of me the other day, and I look about 10. But as you said, it sort of shapes you a little bit, and obviously, become increasingly independent about things. I had to grow up quite quickly, but I think, I wasn't the only one. There were so many others, but I was when I joined, I was one of the youngest of the group, obviously, and the group was, had folks in it 17, 18, and they seemed like old men almost, compared to me. So, you had to sort of mature pretty quickly, really, and
Yeah.
especially with nobody to fall back on, or phone calls home or anything like that. It was, you had to get on with it, really.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, thank you for that. So, what was the point? Because it's unsurprising, you having been brought up in Plymouth, that you joined the Navy, because the Navy is really instilled into the community, isn't it, around Plymouth?
Yeah.
So, what was going on in your life just before you joined, and what made you think, right, I'm going to join there? I know you touched on it, that there's only a few things you can do if you live in Plymouth.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what made you think the Navy's for me?
Um, to be honest, I wasn't that knowledgeable about it. I didn't have a huge desire to go to sea or anything like that. It was just I just got carried along a little bit, and it was really about getting an apprenticeship,
Yeah.
more than anything else. I didn't fancy the alternatives like the dockyard, and also, as you rightly said, I mean, Plymouth's a naval port. I was being brought up on the Navy. My father was actually in the army, during the Second World War. But all around me, uncles and cousins had joined the Navy, so it seemed a sort of a well-trodden path, and it seemed a better alternative to me, Joe. Yeah.
Thank you. You've already touched on the fact that it had a lot to do, and made you the man you are today. What was it like? That first day, and I know it's the Navy. I was Army. It was similar thought processes, though, I dare say, that you turn up on the first day, a youngster, not knowing anything about the world really, and you think, wow, what have I done? I mean, what was going on in your mind at that time?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I wasn't even sure that I joined the Navy at that point. Because my parents hadn't had to sign anything away, and I thought it was another part of the aptitude process,
All
Uh,
right, okay.
and it wasn't until they started cutting my hair off I thought, this is getting serious now. But of course, I knew I was in the process, but I didn't realize it was that point. I thought there was another sort of stage to it, but I was pretty happy with it. But as you rightly say, you think to yourself, crikey. The other thing is, of course, when you signed on at that point, I signed on until I was 30.
Of
So
course, yes,
I
yeah.
was 15. You had to be 12 years from the age of 18. So I had a couple of years before I got to 18, or 2, 3 years before I got to 18. And then I had another 12 years, to do at that point. And, I just think, that you're quite naive at that
Mm.
point. I certainly was. I certainly wasn't worldly or anything, but at the same time, where I went to a place called HMS Fizguard, which was like the apprentices training. I try to think of what the army used to have as their apprentices training place, and it was almost like boarding school, for want of a better word. So um, you weren't exposed to the rigors of the full service life, really.
Yeah.
You were with others of a like mind, and you were doing an apprenticeship. So
Well, that's right, because we have, when I was in anyway, we had Dover, which was the junior leaders, and
yeah,
then we have Tidworth, which is trade training as well. So that's the apprenticeship college. So yeah, along the same lines.
mm,
The year you joined, there was
mm,
something going on, wasn't there, around the world? If the furore, which was 1966, and it goes down in history. And we've had songs released about it. It's coming home.
Yeah.
3 lines on a shirt. What was the atmosphere like in the UK at that time for the World Cup?
Yeah, well, I was actually on leave during that time, and I remember watching the World Cup with my dad. So again, I was 16 by that time, and just watching it, I know it was obviously brilliant. You know, it was the start. I love football anyway, so it was the start of me, you know, getting engaged with football, but also, I sat watching it with my dad on a black and white screen, and just 3 weeks later, he died as well. So I'd gone back to HMS Fizguard, and then he died. So one of the last things I ever did with my dad
Oh,
was to sit down and watch the World Cup final. You know?
oh well, that must be a beautiful memory.
Yeah,
Obviously,
yeah, yeah,
obviously with the sadness, a tinge of
yeah,
sadness, because shortly afterwards, was
yeah.
there any idea that that was going to happen, or was it just sudden?
No, it was. He worked in the dockyard actually, and he'd had chest. It wouldn't have happened now, Joe, to be honest,
Right. Okay.
because he had chest pains and stuff, and they thought it was because he'd been working in submarines. Um,
Right.
and
Okay.
there's a certain they call it claustrophobus, which is something about your chest expanding once you come from a confined space or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that, and you know that full well that today it would, he'd have been in on a ECG and monitor, and he would have lived. But in those days, he didn't. So he died, as I said, about 3 weeks after the World Cup final.
Oh well, I'm deeply sorry about
Yeah.
that. How did that affect you when you went back to the ship?
Yeah. I suppose I was thinking more about my mum as much as anything, because my brother at that time was 2 years younger, so he'd have been about 14, 13 or 14. And then, of course, I was fortunate in some ways that I was HMS Fizguard was just the other side of the river from Plymouth. So whilst I couldn't get home, like on a weekly basis, I was closer. But then I went to Scotland for 3 years
Right.
and didn't see my mum or my brother for that matter for well about every 3 months,
Mm.
between terms and
Yeah,
stuff.
because
So
that's
it was more
pretty.
about that, yeah. And because there was no income coming in. I mean, my dad was the sole breadwinner. My mum was working as like a home help. I don't know what they,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
which was earning very, very little. And I used to we used to have things called I'm just trying to think ration allowance and so on. So I'd always give my mum the money that I got. So if I was going home, the Navy used to give you, I don't know, however much it was, but I'd
Mm.
always give that to my mum. So I don't know quite how she managed in those first few years,
Yeah.
after my dad had died. Yeah.
Yeah, and that must be. I'm sure it probably goes on now. I remember when I joined, then I used to send money home to my mum as well.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't earn much. In fact, I seem to remember. I think I earned about 7 and 6 pence a day. That was the daily rate. So what's that now? About 37p or something, wasn't it?
yeah, yeah,
But the ration allowance that you used to get for leaves and stuff, that was much bigger. So it'd be a decent amount of money, for my mum. Yeah.
yeah. So how long did you serve up in Scotland, and then where did you move, and how did your career progress?
Hmm. So I spent nearly a further 2.5 years, 3 years in Scotland, still doing the apprenticeship, and then started to go. When you finish the apprenticeship, you go on to a ship, and then you go through the ranks by passing exams. So it would have been like going through as a corporal, sergeant,
Mm,
petty officer, chief petty officer, which would be, I don't know, staff sergeant or whatever.
Mm.
So just going on different ships and shore bases then. Um, and um, and then I was asked to, it was suggested I go through for a commission, but I didn't want to go through for an engineering commission. I was really interested in teaching, and there was a route where you could go through to be commissioned as what was then called an instructor officer, like an education officer in the army. And
Yeah.
that was the route that I took. And then, but I think when we talked before, there was sort of a lot of diversions even within
Yeah.
that, you know, in that route.
Because you talked about a part of your career which being a landlubber, I really don't get, and I've known some Navy guys who have spent the time in this particular vessel, and it just astounds me how you can live in such a confined space. It is, of course, being a submariner.
Mm.
And how
Yeah.
did you find that, and what attracted you to it?
Well, I was quite late in it because the other thing was I said I was an instructor officer, not an engineer officer.
Mm.
But they were short of engineer officers in submarines. And because of my background, they said, would you like to undertake what was then a postgraduate program in nuclear science and reactor physics, or some combination of those words, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Which I did do, and then went into submarines as an engineer then. And to be honest, it was fine. It was okay. You know, I mean, I didn't go on long trips. You know, like the ballistic missile submarines
Yeah.
would go away for 10 weeks and not come up.
Yeah.
You know, we would do much less in the type of submarine that I was in, which was a hunter-killer submarine. So I wasn't underwater for, you know, well, I was for weeks, but not for like 10 weeks or something, you know. And you sort of get used to it, but thankfully it was only ever, so I think I spent probably about 3 years doing that, because it was never going to be a career move. It just
Yeah.
happened to be an opportunity that came along. But you know, most of the guys in submarines join as young men and women. I
Yeah.
say guys, men and women
Yeah.
now. You know, and so it becomes a way of life for them. And you know, not many of them want to go to surface
Right.
vessels afterwards. Yeah, they just get used to the you know, the way of life. But as I said, it was only a temporary piece in my career then.
And what was during that time? What year was this now?
That was it was during the Cold War still, so it would have been about 85 to 88, something
All
like
right.
that. 80, 85 to 89, 86 to 89, something like that
Oh,
anyway.
well, that
Yeah.
was all an interesting time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was an interesting time. Yeah, and there's plenty of tales I'm sure will come out, you know, on a much later date. Yeah,
So
you know, there's a lot going on.
what can you disclose, which was the most challenging time for you that you can recall? What's a time that comes to mind from that time?
Um, yeah, what ones can I tell you about?
Yeah. Well, yes, of course, it's not operationally sensitive. It's still not got the mark of top secret on it. And because,
Yeah.
yes, I've got some interesting ones as well. Yeah.
Hmm. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of something that would, you know, I'm mindful this is a podcast rather than a one-to-one conversation and stuff. But maybe I pass on. Maybe I pass on that one.
Okay. Yeah. Well, suffice to say that there were some interesting things.
There was some very interesting stuff going on. Yeah, you know, but again, as with all of these things, long periods of boredom as well.
Yeah. Well,
You know?
Well, I remember, to put it into context, I served in Germany, Osnabrück, in 81 to 83 November, and that was at the height of the Cold War, really, or the threat of. And we used to have regular active edge to prep as though we were going. And it was a heightened time of suspicion,
Mm,
fear,
mm.
all sorts of uncertainty that we weren't too clear about. And only the higher echelon would know any degree of what the threat was, of course, with the
Yeah,
government.
yeah. No, there was an awful lot going on which people, don't know about and won't know about for many years yet.
Yeah, yeah. And it's always interesting where people say freedom of information. It's like when I served in EOD. Honestly, you wouldn't want to know some of the stuff because some of the stuff that goes on is can be quite a
Quite scary.
concern. Yeah, scary. Exactly. So you did 3 years with this as a submariner,
Mm.
and the Navy, just the same as the Army often does, did actually guide you into becoming an engineering officer in their own little way. So where did you go next? What was happening? And what were you thinking about your career at this time?
Yeah, so it wouldn't happen now, I don't think. But I when I left submarines, I thought I was going to leave the service, so I put my resignation letter in. But because I'd done the nuclear programs, I had to do a return of service, so I had to serve 18 months, and they put me in a role. Then, and during that time, my what was then called a pointer, they call them a career managers now, but the person that deals with my career
Yeah.
rang me and said that there was a job come up with the Royal Marines, which and I knew him very well, and he said, I think you'd really like this job with Commando Forces, and as part of the discussion, it turned out that I was going to get promoted as part of it. They were going to put me on an MBA program as well. So I thought, well, that sounds a good deal. So I took out my resignation and went to Commando Forces then, Royal Marines. And that was the best time I had in the service, I think. I spent 4 or 5 years with the Royal Marines then until sort of early 90s, 93, 94, something like that, which was great.
And that was a command post with a 3 Commando Brigade, wasn't it?
With 3 Commander Brigade, yeah. So I was at the headquarters, but I also had responsibility for the training aspects of things in 404245, Commando
Yeah.
Logistics Regiment, and the outlying units, yeah.
Yeah. And what was it like organizing and being in command of the Navy Special Forces effectively? And how proud were you to be in that position?
Well, it wasn't Special Forces as such
Oh,
because it was
no, okay, yes. The commandos, the commando
yeah,
unit.
yeah.
Marine.
Um, so I found it quite difficult initially to get, not accept is the wrong word, because the Royal Marines are part of the Royal Navy anyway. So there's
Yeah.
loads of people like myself, like dentists, like doctors, and others involved in it. And I think the initial transition is probably quite difficult because, of course, at the time I think there was only 400 or 500 Royal Marine officers, so you have to sort of prove your worth, if you like. But once you're accepted, I found it then more difficult going back to the Navy after the Royal Marines.
Yeah.
Because I had there was a different mentality. So it was a difficult phase going into the Royal Marines, but coming back out of the Royal Marines was even more difficult then.
Oh,
Put it
was
that
it?
way.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the reason I use the term special forces, I appreciate that we don't want to mix with the SBS and the SAS. The fact is they are still an elite force, and many will
Oh
come.
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you'd because you mentioned there that it was difficult when you finished with the Royal Marine Commandos.
Mm.
And did that difficulty, that transition in itself, because we'll be talking about transition from military to civilian street later, did that transition sort of give you any challenge? If it did, what challenge? And was that sort of the death knell for you wanting to come out of the military then? Or what happened? What was the process going on in your mind?
Yeah, it didn't. No, it didn't make me think about coming out of the military because I by that time I got an MBA and I was going into another
Mm.
role using that. And by that time I only had 3 or 4 years left
Yeah.
anyway.
And,
So
and that's the reason I posed the question, because I know when your military career was coming to an end. So I just wondered whether you thought, right, okay, now I'm going to be preparing for the next chapter, if that makes sense.
yeah, and so yes, I did. So if the question is more about, when did you start thinking about transition to civilian life?
Mm.
I said that it was probably 7 years before I
Yeah.
left,
And
because sorry, go on.
no, that is, I did cut across you, but the reason being is because that's an essential element to the conversation, really. Because I know when I look back on various people who've left the military, I always find that the more preparation they give to signing off, the better they do. The more prepared they are anyway when they leave the military and start a civilian career, because planning and preparation prevents poor performance. We know that. So that's the purpose of the question. So you started the process like 7 years before you left.
Yeah, I did, and it was always on my mind. But I was in a good job with the Royal Marines. The Navy was sponsoring me to do an MBA and so on, so I wasn't unhappy at all.
Mm.
But I had to think, what am I going to do with this? It was interesting actually, Joe, because I just before this call, I do some mentoring for a government association helping young entrepreneurs to grow. And I was just telling him exactly this story because he's thinking about his future and so on. And I remember as part of the MBA, there was an assignment asking you uh, to envision what you were going to be doing in 7 years' time
Mm.
and so on. And I thought, God, I don't even know what I'm doing next week, never mind 7 years' time. But because it was an assignment, I had to do it. And I thought, right, well, I'm going to make something up. And I was interested in skiing at the time, so I thought, right, I'm going to get qualifications as a professional ski instructor, and
Yeah.
I'm going to join one of what was then the Big Six consultancy firm.
Yeah.
So this was 7 years before I was leaving the service, and I didn't know what I could do in a consultancy. I just fancied it. And at the time, I was with the Royal, I was in khaki, and within 7 years, both of those had been achieved. So I was working with Pricewaterhouse, then
Yeah.
PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I got the qualification for the professional ski teaching. But what as explained to the guy I was talking with, those things must have been embedded in my mind, but that activity brought them to the front, and I was making stuff up. But obviously, that making stuff up had to come from somewhere, you
Yeah.
know and that was the reason behind it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's interesting because I joined the Corps of Royal Engineers, and the engineers have three roles: primary role, soldier; secondary role is field engineer for bridging, mine warfare, roads and airfields, and water points, etc. Tertiary role is a tradesman or tradeswoman, tradesperson. And when I signed up, I said that I want to be a plumber and pipe fitter because I was looking beyond, because I served 7.5 years in the regs and then a further term with the Territorial Army. And it's interesting, I joined with the end in mind. By the way, I'm not a plumber and pipe fitter now, but at least I had a plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
And I did the same. I can't say I did it when I joined because, as I said, I was so, but
yeah,
by
yeah,
this time I was like 39 or
yeah,
40.
yeah,
So it
yeah.
was, yeah.
Yeah, and by that time, actually, you were a seasoned professional in the military,
Mm.
and you knew because it's much harder, isn't it, to be making big life decisions like that when certainly when you're 15
Well, you don't know about life.
no, I know. So that was great, and it was great that the military supported you,
Mm.
and the training that it gave you. So
Yeah.
you served with PricewaterhouseCoopers. How much of an eye opener was that, and how did the transition go? Because I suppose in your mind you'd already become a civilian. So how did you find the transition?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. When I saw the question, I found it quite difficult. And I went to an organization which was Pricewaterhouse, then became PricewaterhouseCoopers, which was brilliant in terms of support, almost paternalistic. I think if I'd have gone to another organization, I might have struggled a bit more.
Right.
But I can't remember if I told you this last time we spoke, but when I left, I got a job which was an increase of pay of around about 20% from my
Oh,
military
wow.
salary.
Yeah.
And I was going to they gave me a title manager. That all sounded very good, and I had all sorts of things like flexible, car allowance and goodness knows what. And I ended up, I was 47 at the time. And then when I got there, I realized that all the managers that were on the same pay rate then as I was were about 28. I was 20 years older than most
Right.
of them.
Yeah.
I thought, this doesn't feel right. I mean, I wasn't angry about it, but I was just sort of questioning it a little bit, or why I was put in this position. But the truth was, and I think for somebody leaving the service, I think you need to know. There's a couple of things. First of all, it's much being aware of what you can do, but also what you can't do, and the value that you can bring or don't bring. And what I realised was that I had no commercial knowledge, really, commercial nous. I had knowledge, but no commercial nous at all. I didn't know about pitching for work, set up proposals, pricing things, and so on.
Yeah.
Because nobody in the military would have done that sort of thing.
No.
Um, what I was able to do, of course, I was able to build an effective team to motivate people and so on and so on. But I could see then very quickly why I was put in as a manager and not a senior manager. And of course, you get to learn the ropes a
Yeah.
little bit, and then you gradually work your way up and so on. Um, but that was one thing.
Just
And I think the other thing, yeah, go on.
before we move on,
Mm,
because what I want to pick up on that, because I would like to make sure I do not miss this,
mm,
is because one of the things I talk about, and I'm sure you do when you're mentoring uh,
mm,
the guys that you work with, skills can be taught, right? A lot of the cultural behavior, values, beliefs that you taught, that you brought up within the military, like punctuality, discipline, integrity, honesty, openness,
mm,
all those reliability, all those sorts of things, they're so embedded in you. So once you started to move on and you discovered that maybe you weren't the smartest cookie in the box for
mm.
the skills, how did you recognize the strengths, the other strengths that you had, the soft skills, if you like?
Mm. Well, I think they, I mean, I knew what I could provide anyway,
Mm,
but when you're joining in something like that, they call you a manager, but you're not really managing anybody.
no,
Um, but of course, the point at which I started to work with project teams and so on, and was able to say, look, I don't understand this, you'll have to tell me, and so on. But it was part of that vulnerability, if you like, was attractive to people in building a team because I had to ask the questions and so on. So the softer skills about getting on with people and getting the best from people and so on, that was really helpful.
mm,
I think the other thing that you have to be wary of within the service with your service thing, because as you said, one of the soft skills then, if we're talking about, is loyalty.
Mm,
Um, and I think you have to, when you're moving in that direction, you have to treat loyalty with a lighter touch, I would say.
mm, yeah.
And we also, as part of the military, you accept the role of authority and hierarchy. Um,
Mm,
and being too loyal or too acceptant of authority is not the best skill to have. And if let me explain that a bit more because um, it sounds a little bit I don't know, contradictory. What I mean by it is you're expected to challenge more.
yeah.
You are expected to ask questions and be curious. So it's not a case of just sitting there and saying, "Well, if the boss thinks that's the way, then you know, then that's what we've got to do." Because that, to in the military, to an extent, I mean, it depends where you are. Of course, there is a discussion about it, but you would always accept that authority. So
Yeah.
I think that there's that piece. And you have to be, I talk about commercial nous as well. You have to be harder about things. So, and I'll give you an example. A buddy of mine, um, I'd been outside for many years. He was an engineer in the Navy. He was leaving. He was offered a job um, by a company, or he'd applied for a couple of jobs, and he'd accepted this particular role, which was a reasonably good role. But the one he really wanted, then he didn't think he was going to have. Then it came in, and he was offered that job. So he spoke to me and he said, "What do you think I should do? Because I feel really loyal to this group now that I've accepted their offer, but this group have come up." And I had to say to him, you have to do what's best for you, not for the organization, for that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
organization. In other words, it was up to him to say, but my advice was take the one that you'd always wanted and go with it. Because
Mm,
if something happened with this other firm, you would be the first out, the one
yeah.
he'd already accepted. And he did. He went with that one. And then 3 months after, the firm that had given him that first offer folded. He'd have been the first out.
Right. Okay.
So again, we go in with a sense of loyalty to people, and you should. I'm not suggesting for one moment that you shouldn't have a sense of loyalty. All I'm saying is it shouldn't be blind loyalty. It needs to be attuned with some element of caution,
Yeah.
and then it needs to be, a certain nous about it.
And I suppose in that sense, because it's like when you're on the plane, when you get on a plane jet, and the first thing they tell you, or one of the first things on the safety brief is if the oxygen mask comes down, put your own on first before you help anyone else.
Yeah,
Which can be difficult if you've got a young child with you, but at the end of the day, if you lose consciousness because you've got no oxygen, then the child is finished anyway. So,
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah, and I suppose in that sense, in the military, we're protected, I suppose, because you know it's going to continue, whatever, and you're
yeah,
always with your team. Whereas this firm folded after 3 months, which is, I suppose, when you look at it, it could be their morality could be questioned actually to be recruiting someone when they know they're going to fold because they must have had an idea.
yeah.
So yeah, that was a good call, definitely, and it by the sounds of it, he certainly made the
Yeah, and
instinct.
don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not saying for one moment that you shouldn't be loyal to a degree, but not in the all-encompassing loyalty
Yeah.
that you would experience in in the service. Really.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't in questioning your integrity
Mm,
at all. It's just that civilian street is a different
mm.
animal,
Yeah,
certainly
yeah,
in many
definitely.
ways, because it's
Yeah,
commercialized.
yeah.
So when when you had your time at PricewaterhouseCoopers and then you moved on to head of consultancy, what happened then? Because you took an interesting step, which I'd like you to share with us, please.
You mean when I left PricewaterhouseCoopers
Yeah, yeah.
to?
And then,
Um,
yeah, please.
Yeah, so at PricewaterhouseCoopers, I was a senior manager in the executive development team, and then I started to question myself because I was advising these people at an executive level, and I'd never run a business myself. I.e.,
Mm,
I'd not been really responsible for recruitment, P&L, and so on and so on. And the offer came up for me to take on a job with a company called OPP, which probably doesn't ring a bell to many people here, but many people have heard of MBTI, Myers-Briggs and
yeah, yeah.
stuff. So it was that company, a psychometric testing and organization behavior company. And it was just a really good job, but it also gave me an opportunity to um, hire, fire, run a P&L, and also be doing continue with some of the work. So it's an opportunity to learn, Joe, as
Mm,
much as anything else. So, and I'm talking about now, I was 50 at that time,
yeah.
51
Mm.
maybe. So that was the reason for leaving PwC.
And Myers-Briggs is world renowned for testing people's stickability, psychometric testing, all sorts of things. And
Mm.
it's a useful tool, and I've used it. So that must have given you quite some insight into human behavior and how things work.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't classify myself as an organizational psychologist because
No,
I'm not qualified
no,
in
no.
those areas. But by the very nature of the work and by the very nature of the psychometric tools we were using, you build up a fair idea about it. And, so I became then accredited in a whole host of tools,
Mm.
which can help in executive development and leadership development. Yeah.
And what I find particularly interesting is because your background and the age you left the military is is testament to the fact of something I believe in strongly. Every day is a school day,
Mm, mm,
and I think your thirst for knowledge stood you in good stead for what you did after OPP. So what happened then when you'd started to amass this knowledge, bring together this information, and
mm.
and learn, discover how to read profit and loss accounts and run a business and all the other stuff. So what was going on in your mind then?
Yeah. So I suppose maybe I should start with why I left OPP because that was we they we were going on a strategy of consultancy and a solution-led consultancy approach rather than a product-led consultancy approach.
Right.
Um, but then we had an opportunity to buy another psychometric test called 16PF from the US. We bought that, but it struck me that we were going back to a product led rather than a solution led. So I didn't feel that it was right for me to stay on, in
Yeah.
that role. They needed somebody who was an occupational psychologist in my role. So that's why I left. And that's when I started to run my own business. So that was 2003.
Mm.
And then that's how I got involved in executive and leadership development, as a business, then as
Yeah.
my own business,
And at this time, you were what age?
at that time I was about 51, 52, maybe. Oh, no, 2000, I would be 53. Yeah.
So that's that's a great age to start your
Great
business.
age. Yeah. You could, well, leaving the military at 47 is still quite old,
Yeah,
compared to
I
many,
know.
but so I was lucky to get a job, but in many ways, if I'd have stayed on, I could have probably stayed on till I was about 53, maybe. But then I think once you get over the 50 barrier coming out of the service, it gets slightly more difficult. So
Yeah.
I decided to come out before the 50 barrier, i.e. at 47. then. But
So
yeah,
you
still
did
a great age to start your
yeah, it
business.
is. And you served your 6 year apprenticeship,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
learning about Civvy Street. And the reason I bring that out actually is because, especially when you look at social media now, and I know of what I would consider youngsters, 20-year-olds or maybe late teens, and they go and they've got this social media presence where it shows like you can have what you want when you want. And a lot of the time they're hiring these cars, these flash cars, and they don't belong to them, right?
yeah,
And I get it, yes, of course. Every now and again there is a shining star who becomes he or she develops something and overnight it becomes viral and it just makes lots of money. The
mm,
fact is though that most of the time it doesn't happen overnight.
mm,
And even at the respectable age of 47, when you've served in the military since the
mm,
age of 15, and
mm,
you know one or two things, you've served on a nuclear submarine, which is completely out of my depth. You served in command of three commando brigade, learn lots of stuff, and then you're starting again in civilian life at the age of 47, and then you serve your 6 years apprenticeship. So really, overnight success. It took you how many years to become an overnight success? And you
yeah,
still weren't there yet, were you?
yeah. And no, I'm still going, still learning. But I had a conversation with a young naval officer the other day, again, in sort of partly a mentoring role. And I think as we're talking about transition and so on, sometimes you're looking for the perfect job. When you're leaving, this young man was 29 or about. Um, and yes, it's great to do that, but sometimes I feel that it's okay to go for the not so perfect job, but something you could get going with to provide you with the launch pad and
Yeah.
learn some of these skills, the things that I had to learn about, commercial side and stuff. And then it puts you in a better position to go into the job that you really, really would like. You know what I mean? As you said, all of the stuff that I did leading up to me becoming running my own business was contributing to that. So at
Mm.
PwC and then at OPP. So it all adds to it. Yeah.
Thank you. So, with your setting up the business in 2003,
Mm.
and then subsequently there was something else which we'll talk about in a minute. What was that journey like? The transition, if you like, from being employed to self-employed, running your own business and spinning a few plates, maybe?
Mm. Yeah. The answer was remarkably easy because for a start, I think it would have been very difficult, very different if we'd have had kids, at university or whatever. But we
Yeah.
don't have children, so stop. The mortgage was manageable and so on. So there wasn't huge risks. But what I'd done, um, first of all, you've got to prove to yourself that you can do it, and I was able to do that through my time at PwC and OPP, and feel confident that you can do it. But also, you're building networks all the time in any case. So when I left the employment, then I didn't just drop off the end. I had a safety net
Yeah.
there, and I was, I had job brackets jobs clients to go to, which I knew would earn me a little bit of money. And what I did actually, um, I started working for myself in July the 1st or something. And I said to my wife, right, let's wait until January the 1st and we'll see if I've got 6 months salary in the bank. In other words, that could keep me going till the June or whatever, then I'll keep going with it. But if I don't, then I'll look for a proper job then.
Yeah.
And we got to January the 1st, and I had a year's worth of salary in there. So I thought, oh, this is okay. And then we kept on going and never really looked back after that.
Fantastic.
Mm.
And what did the journey look like then? Who did you work with? What types of clients that you can say? And
Yeah.
how did that help you develop to where you are now, which we'll talk about in a second?
Yeah. Uh, so basically, at those early days, you take anything and everything. You know, you're working hard. And I was talking with my plumber the other day, and we were sharing the same story. You know, you take everything. You have to manage your fees accordingly, and so on. Um, and then gradually, you're getting, one would like to think, more and more work, and that's the point at which you can be more selective.
Yeah,
And by being more selective, what I mean by that is you put your fee up, and if they
yeah,
accept it, then that's fine. If they don't, well, that's not too bad because you've got others.
yeah.
And I mean, that sounds a bit hard nosed, but that's just business, you know.
Well, yes, it is. And I remember when similar, when I was training as a finance advisor and to where I am now as a finance advisor, if you had a pulse, I'd see you. Whereas now it has to be more selective, not because I want to help any less people. It's because time is finite, if that makes sense. And there's only so many, there are some things that I can automate. There are others that need personal conversations and interventions. So I totally get what you mean. And there has to be uh, give and take with how you deliver your service, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I don't mean that in a moral or an unethical way.
No,
You know, I just think that it's a natural progression. It's almost Darwinism, you know. Apart from that, every time I did anything, I was learning
mm,
from it. You know, I would have gradually then build up relationships with clients, you know, and I mean, you know, I can tell you one of the clients that I had was at that time called BG Group. It's Shell now,
yeah,
and I traveled more with them than I ever did in 30 years in the services. You know, I did,
mm,
and learned a lot about different cultures, and most of the work that I do now is international, you know, is internationally cultural then.
yeah,
And that's another thing, of course, you know, with the service, you come in from a strong culture there.
yeah,
Um, you don't always work in specific cultures. I talk about foreign
yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
cultures, international cultures now. I mean, you do if you're on exchanges and stuff like that. You know, of course you
Mm.
do. Yeah, so you're always learning. You know.
And what would you say the secret of your success is?
Oh, yeah.
And while you're thinking about that, you may think, well, am I successful or am I not? Because I get that as well. Like as ex-military people, we sometimes have more difficulty measuring success, if that
Mm.
makes sense, because we're always taught, right, we've done this, now we want the next level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
With where you are now, what's the secret you would put your success down to?
Well, I think you've already hit on it then. And it's about, I've always had, whether I was in the military or whether I was, you know, outside of the military, i.e., you know, the last 20 or 30 years,
Mm,
um, is always having a challenge,
yeah,
always looking for the next step. You know, what else can I learn? What can I, you know, what would be exciting to do? What would be enthusiastic to do? So it's always about having personal and professional
mm,
goals, and but at the same time being able to balance that um, with life. I
yeah,
think. So in other words, you know, not to have personal and professional goals to the you know, to with nothing else.
Yeah, yeah.
You have to have a life, and I think that within that, of course, you have to have to look back and think to yourself, to do it in an ethical, again, going back to the
Mm,
ethical and moral way, and recognizing that success is also about the family.
yeah.
And I think it was John F. Kennedy, wasn't it, who said something like success has many fathers. But I think what he was meaning at that point was, success has many ways to define itself.
Mm, yeah.
And, there would be a young mother bringing up a family with, with very in difficult circumstances, producing three brilliant children.
Yeah.
That's success
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So we put success in terms of where you are in a business sense or a social sense.
Yeah.
But it's also about other things of
Yeah.
success.
And I
But
suppose you were touching on it where some people drive so much for commercial success, it could be to the detriment of their relationship success and their personal
yeah,
well-being success and
yeah,
many other things.
yeah. I absolutely agree with that, and that's the reason why I was saying about an ethical way,
Mm,
because for a start, you can't run roughshod over other people to achieve your success, or
no.
you can't. In my business, I couldn't. So if we were working together, if you employed me as an associate, for example, then it would be very unethical for me to try and make inroads into your client.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
even though that might be seen as me getting success because I've got a new client, I would have lost out because I did it unethically, and I lost you as a colleague or an
yeah.
associate.
And the method and the methodology behind the
Yeah,
success
yeah,
matters greatly. Yeah, certainly. So, of course, the opposite of success is
mm,
failure. Now, I don't believe that. I believe that failure is good in proportion to the success. How do you deal with failure, and what lessons has it taught you?
mm. So again, failure, like success, has got many definitions, and I think that if you are talking about failure in a business sense, which means that the business has failed or you've gone bankrupt or something, that's a significant failure. But I think what we're talking about now is failure, perhaps when you haven't been successful in a job, or you didn't get the promotion, or
Mm,
you lost the contract, or
yeah,
whatever, something like that. And that's more common, of course. But they still, for me, they still have it still brings out the same emotions then, if you like, because the first thing that I would say is that you've got to be able to learn from it.
mm,
Um, because I work a lot in what they call business experimentation, and we don't accept the word failure. It's a learning
yeah,
opportunity.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so, what can you learn from it? And what is it that if you had a similar situation in the future that you would do differently? So, I think there's a piece of reflection about that.
yeah,
Also, getting feedback about from others about that, i.e., like a 360 piece. Um, but then I also think there is a piece that if once you learn from it, you have to take responsibility for it and to move on.
yeah,
You can't let it grind away. And when I talk about responsibility for it, you can't turn around and say, oh yeah, that happened because blah 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 of these circumstances. So you're sort of externalizing the blame, if you like.
yeah, yeah,
You have to accept your own role in this, having learned from it, and then think about, then almost compartmentalize it, this piece, and then work out tactics and a strategy to move on,
yeah,
so that you're prepared if you reached a similar situation, you'd have a good idea about what not to do or what to do in
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So for me, it's about, if it's failure, it's about learn from it by analyzing it, take responsibility for it, and develop a plan in which you can compartmentalize it and move on. Those would be the three things.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I agree that the fail is first attempt in learning. You haven't failed until you give up. Even if you went bankrupt, there are still things you can do. Rather,
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So
There's something else actually I'll just throw in here. As you know, most of the work that I do is in executive development, and one of the biggest factors of executive derailment is not being able to bounce back from failure or
mm,
from a setback. Because quite often, when somebody's got to an executive position, they've had success most of the way through, and they've
yeah.
rarely had to deal with it. And when they have failure or a setback at a senior position, then that can be a derailer, really disruptive,
Mm,
and end the career. So
yeah.
just throw that one in.
No, that's interesting because uh, especially it could, I would imagine, and from my experience too, it affects those particularly who haven't experienced failure until a higher
That's it.
level.
That's it. Yeah, and it's one of the biggest issues around executive derailment.
Yeah.
That's resilience and not being able to bounce back from the
Yeah.
setback.
I mean, I know you do a lot of executive coaching and mentoring, which is great because I do the same. I share your passion for helping someone to do what they wouldn't have done had we not been there. I mean, that's a fantastic gift to me, which I'm very grateful to every time I see that, and I'm sure you are too. So, with that in mind, how important do you think it is to have a good coach and or mentor?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there's quite a distinction between coaching and mentorship,
Yes,
as
I
you well
know.
know.
Yes.
And so if I stick with the well, no, I will. There are differences, but I'll treat them the same way then. Um, I think that it is more important the higher you get in an organization. And the reason I say that is that the higher you get in an organization, the fewer people you can rely upon to have an open and honest discussion, because quite a lot of them are your peers. And
Mm,
in many cases, those peers are also competitors for the next job,
yeah.
or their direct reports, and in which that might be, you might not feel comfortable sharing some level of vulnerability. That's wrong, by the way. They should
Yeah. Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's what they feel. So I think having a coach, I would say this anyway, wouldn't I? But having a coach or a stroke mentor, I think is an important part of um, anybody's role. And so the conversation I was having earlier this afternoon was with a very entrepreneurial butcher.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
you know, and yet yesterday or the day before, no, yesterday, I was talking with a senior executive in a global organization in a coaching role.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's quite different. But you know what? Whether it's coach stroke mentor, the value of somebody articulating the thoughts that are in their head, and just by speaking them out loud, sometimes the coach mentor doesn't even need to say or do anything because they've all, well, but they've answered their own questions.
I suppose I always say it's not the depending on what role I'm adopting because we will come on to that because it's an interesting question, the difference between a coach and a mentor. I think that when you ask world class questions, that's when the world class answers come out.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And sometimes, that's why I would make the distinction between a coach and a mentor. A coach need not necessarily know any technicalities or any experience of that that person's function, whereas the
Yeah.
mentor probably does.
Yeah. And I use the analogy, a football analogy actually. And if you think I'm not going down the right path, please shoot me down in flames. I compare Kenny Dalglish and Alex Ferguson, right?
Mm,
In my opinion, Alex Ferguson was a great coach. Kenny Dalglish was a great mentor. And the
mm,
reason I say that is because Kenny Dalglish could coach from the skills and knowledge he'd read, but he could also mentor because he was a great footballer.
mm.
Whereas Alex Ferguson was an okay footballer. He wasn't world class though, unlike Kenny Dalglish. So that's my analogy to to bring out the difference between a coach and a mentor. What's your take on the difference between a coach and a mentor?
Well, if you go, as I said, with maybe I'll just go back.
Mm.
The word mentor comes from ancient Greece,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
and Odysseus, when he went off to the war in Troy, he said to his if he didn't, he said to his friend mentor, "If I don't come back, I want you to teach him everything you know."
Mm.
So the word mentor is associated with having a certain level of expertise and
Yeah.
knowledge. And that's why I'm saying a mentor, and that's in the situations we're talking about, is somebody who probably has knowledge of either the function or the organization or something like that.
Yeah.
In most cases,
Mm.
um, the coach, however, does, as you said, if you ask world class questions, the coach doesn't need to know anything about that.
Yeah.
There is, but in modern day, we tend to use coach and mentor almost,
Yeah. I know.
anonymously.
Intertwined. Yeah.
But there is a distinct difference in
Mm.
my mind between the two, and I think you have to think about it when you're in a coaching role
Yeah.
and when you're in a mentoring role.
And I think it is important to recognize what hat you're wearing before you
Absolutely, Joe.
before you
Yeah,
go
yeah,
into a meeting,
yeah,
because
yeah,
you
yeah,
could well be taking
yeah.
someone down the wrong path.
Yeah, yeah. Because what you wouldn't expect a coach to be saying is, "Well, I think you should do this,"
Yeah.
you know, because the answers come from the individual. But the mentor maybe wouldn't use those same words, but could add something in,
Yeah.
about the situation from their own knowledge
Yeah. Of course.
as well. So
Thank you. So we are singing from the same hymn book. In fact, we're on
mm,
the same page there. So
yeah.
that's fantastic. With regards, because you've mentioned a few times, and going back to the part of our discussion on about the submarine, right? Your time with the nuclear subs, about social and social networks, and then later in the conversation we were talking about business networks and how you'd already set things up while you were in an employment role with PricewaterhouseCoopers and OPP. How important did you think that grounding was for you?
Um, uh, I think it's hugely important because all of my work, certainly, and the people listening to this, especially if they're going in to run a business and as an independent and so on, both social network and business networks are really, really important. I think
Mm.
what you have to watch, though, and I mean, you're probably more aware of this than with your role,
Yeah.
is a delicate balance between
Mm.
the social and the business
Yeah, yeah.
networks, really. And the difference with me is, have I ever got any work? Yes. Have I ever got any work through social networks? Yes, I have, but not very much.
No.
But out of business networks is where most of the stuff goes. And I'm very wary on the stuff that I've done in social work I've done in a social network. You have to be really wary about not destroying the social relationship or not having any danger or risk of damaging the social relationship.
Yeah.
That's why I've sort of avoided it quite often, and
Yeah.
I would recommend somebody else rather than me
Yeah.
doing it if I felt there
Well,
was any teacher.
and that's great. A fantastic answer, because I was more leaning towards the business network for the business. The social network was more to do with during your military career, if that makes sense. So thank you. You hit the nail on the head there. You were bang on target with that answer. Thank you. So we're coming towards the end of our chat now.
Mm.
And you've given lots of fantastic information. Thank you. And it's great that we've been able to chew the fat as well, and make it conversational, because I found it really interesting. If I were to ask you, in fact, I am going to ask you, what is, if you could put it into one tip, what's the greatest tip you would give to someone who is either leaving the military, has left the military and maybe is having some challenges, or maybe has left the military and is doing great but wants to get better? What's the one tip that you would give?
Mm. Mm. Well, I think first of all, everybody comes out of the military with some great experience and some great attitudes and so on. And I think the I think what's important is they should think about fitting that experience into the job rather than trying to fit the job into their experience. I'm going to have to explain that, I think,
Yeah,
because
I know where you're coming from. I know where you're coming from.
you know what I mean. Okay, if I give you an example, then a pretty senior officer, acquaintance of mine, he left the service. He was a commander, so a lieutenant colonel, and he went into Accenture or somewhere like that in London. And he went into, he was what they now call a logistics officer, but
Yeah.
supply and so on. And he went into a job which was like a new concierge offering
Yeah.
solution, for people. And when I was speaking with him, he said, "Well, he said it's not much different from running a naval wardroom or an officer's mess." He said, "I just do everything the same." Well, sadly, he tried to fit everything that was happening in a naval wardroom or officer's mess and try and fit it into this concierge service.
Yeah.
And he lasted about 3 months. Whereas what he should have understood was to see this as a much more standalone piece and start to think, oh yeah, now that could work or this could work, but you have to
Yeah.
understand. I guess it might be, somebody trying to, would it be called in the army like a field workshop or something like that? A field, somebody trying to put everything and then going into, I don't know, a commercial garage or something, and then trying to fit everything they were doing into a field workshop into a garage situation.
Yeah.
There will always be things that you can, but understand the job and then fit your experience into it rather than trying to, do it the other way.
That's a great tip, because that brings us on nicely to the point about how valuable and transferable do you think the skills are that you learn in the military in civilian life?
Yeah, I mean, as I've just said, I think they're hugely valuable. But I think that when I was talking, do you remember the early piece about being sure about what you.
So thank you. And you know what? I could speak with you all day quite easily. In fact, for a number of days, actually, Rob. What I'm going to come on to now is, and we talked about this off and off script, about how valuable and transferable skills are that you learn in the military. For instance, like I've spoken to people who have been in artillery, mortar platoons, and they've questioned, well, how can I use my skill being able to fire a mortar in civilian street? And it's not just about that actual action, is it? It's about all the things that lead up to being able to deliver that munition in the right place on time with the team, isn't it? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's two elements to it, Joe.
Mm,
As you said, I think on the one end, there's somebody saying, I'm used to firing a mortar or so, or driving a tank or whatever.
yeah,
So how the heck can I, adjust that, and how can that add value to a civilian organization?
yeah,
And I think I said earlier on about when people go in and try and do the opposite. In other words, they
yeah,
think, yeah, I know what to do here. I can do everything.
yeah,
Um, and so I think the first, the real answer to your question, there's a huge amount of skills, behaviors, attitudes, mindsets that the serviceman can bring to any organization. What I would say to anybody, and again, it goes back to the piece I was saying earlier, what I would say is that really try to understand what the job is about first, and then start to apply the skills that you already have
mm,
to that particular piece of work. So, I don't know if I think we mentioned about a field workshop or going into a garage or a
yeah, yeah,
quartermaster, perhaps, going into a logistics piece. Of course, there are similarities, and there's going to be so many skills that somebody can actually transfer, but they need to be appropriate, and they need to understand how they can um, contribute to that role, really. And I
mm,
think that's
yeah,
that's the main thing. So yes, lots of it, but don't think you can't transfer those skills. And on the other end, don't think that all of those skills are going to be easily transferable. It's take stock of it and be selective as to where you're trying. Try it out, experiment with it, and that's the piece that I would say, Joe.
thank you. So effectively, it's a big endorsement on transfer transferability of the skills you learn in the military and how useful they are to employers on Civvy Street.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that employers will be, keen to embrace the military skills.
Mm,
But I think that at the same time, and I mean, certainly I found it, I think I said at the beginning of the thing, I think you need to have a really commercial head on
yes.
it. And what is this business all about? You
Yeah.
know, and I think that's the sort of context within which you need to actually select which of these skills that are going to help the business or
Yeah.
the services or the outputs from that business.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult um, when you're not talking about a specific job, I guess. But the short answer is yes, huge amount of transferable skills, but be aware and selective as how you apply them, and that's where you're going to win. Win for both sides, for
Yeah.
you and the employer as well.
And that's just sparked a thought process for me. Say someone's not been in the military, it's still useful to look at the skills you've learned in your previous job and then do your homework on the firm, the organization you're going to. So you can say, look, how are my skills going to fit in with you and what value do I bring? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And this is why I always say to people when they're leaving the service, and not just leaving the service. I had a conversation last night with a neighbor about a functional CV,
Mm,
rather than just a pure chronological
yeah,
CV. And the functional CV will be able to get you think about what roles you did through your military service, but frame it under headings like project management, logistics,
yeah,
leadership, and so on. Because then you can really start to uh, copy and paste, mix and match to say this works well and better for this particular job, and that works well for better. So that's why I think a functional CV is better, because doing what you just said, you've got to understand about the job. You've got to understand what the role is, and then you can tailor your pitch, if you like, to
yeah,
that job.
exactly. Thank you. So we're coming to the close now. And you know, you believe just the same as me that every day is a school day. So what's next for you? Where are you taking your talents? What's your goal for this year?
Mm. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm sort of at the autumn end of my career now, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
And so I've stopped doing as much client work as I used to do. I'm doing pro bono work and paid work as well, but mostly in a mentoring guise or a coaching guise. I'm on the board of a leadership development business. I'm still working with the UK government on the Help to Grow initiative,
All right.
um,
Yeah, yeah.
and working with people in that way, and also working with the stuff that I've been doing for quite a while now, and that's in business experimentation, where I'm helping chief execs and executive teams to develop strategy and business growth. So still doing that, still happy to continue to do it, but not as much as I was before when I was traveling all around and stuff.
Well, thank you for your service, and thank you for your service to the community as well. So, how could people get in touch? What's the best way to get in touch?
Oh, well, will people have my email from this?
I would suggest that you go for LinkedIn, is how we met.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn under Rob James MBE, because there's lots of Rob Jameses.
Yeah.
So if people wanted to contact me about, if they're starting up a business, if they're already in a business and want to get it to grow, that's the type of thing that I'm doing right now. So I'm very willing to,
Yeah.
share thoughts and have a call like this with people.
And it's Rob James MBE.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
it would be remiss of me, and I know that you haven't spoken about it. What was the post nominals for? Because that's a proud MBE. I would imagine that you're really proud of it. What brought that about, and how were you recognised for the services?
It was, I said I spent 5 years with Commando Forces, with Royal Marines Commando Forces, and it was the end of that. So it wasn't for, I don't think, one specific thing. It was just the service during my time with Royal Marines.
The collective, and that was,
Yeah.
and I recognise, I recognise that the accolade, and it is worthy. So well done, congratulations for that. So
Yeah.
Rob James, MBE, thank you very much for your time today. I've really enjoyed speaking to you, and thank you for your service.
That's fine, Joe. And if people want to contact me, you've heard where they can do so. And good luck with this, what you're doing. It sounds really good. The thing behind you, Veterans to Success, sounds brilliant. So good luck for yourself and for everybody else that might be listening in.
JoeTeams.com is a resource I have created to fulfill my mission to help 1 million veterans and business entrepreneurs like you achieve the goals, dreams, and aspirations they deserve. JoeTeams.com is jam-packed full of valuable resources specifically designed to help you on your journey to success. Visit JoeTeams.com now to find out how you can join and start your journey to success immediately. That's JoeTeams.com, JoeTeams, JoeTeams.com. And until we meet again, have a brilliant day.